Okay, now I'm gonna do another one of these things, right? Well, I'm trying to do this quickly without pausing or doing any edits or anything, so if I accidentally sneeze into the microphone or swear, I'm so sorry. I'm gonna try not to do either of those things. Okay. Also, I can't promise I'm gonna sound not dumb. What I'm doing is making a. There's a YouTube video that, if I remember, I'll put a link to it in the description or something. There's a YouTube video that has over 25,000 views from a couple of years ago of how to make a server using the Rocket crate from Rust, and I'm going to try to quickly make that from memory because I've gone through it and I want to be able to do that stuff without having to look it up again. So I'm going to try to do that. That's the thing I want to do quickly within about 30 minutes of time, and then I've done that already before, and this is more of an exercise for me. Then after I get to that point, what I want to do is the server, basically you interact with it using, what do you call it, a curl command or a curl command in the command line, and I want to throw together a basic front end that can interact with it instead. Something I haven't really done a lot of before, so I'll be experimenting my way through that part of it. Anyway, this video is definitely not going to be informative. Well, it might be to some people, but it's mostly me doing this for my own practice. So if you want to see that, stick around, because I'm about to do so much of that. How do you do this now? Okay. First thing. It's stuck on the nightly version. I'd like it to be the, not that, so. I have to say something like Rust up set override stable, I think. I'm going to have to ask my friend Copilot about that. How do I switch it to use stable Rust in this folder? With Rocket 0.4 versions, you had to use the nightly version, but you don't need to anymore. Rust up, override. I had the command wrong. Set stable. You do it like that. Rusty version. There we have it. So first thing I'm going to do is cargo. I've already done cargo new to make the actual folder that I'm in, and the reason I didn't do that on the screen was because I wanted the Rust analyzer to be opened, and I'm not going to get into it all. And you might know what I mean by that. And I gotta do this. I gotta go cargo add Rocket. All right, so that's one thing I need, and I'm gonna add cargo watch. That will give me the ability to have this thing run the server without interrupting, or what I mean is, if you were to do cargo run on this Rocket server, it would run something where it listens on port 8000 for incoming requests and all that. But if you change something and have to recompile it, you have to close that server and reopen it. If you use cargo watch, it'll automatically rerun the server with the new version of the code you just made changes on. So I'm going to be using a SQLite or SQLite, however you say it, database for this for simplicity. I better get started. Okay, so the Rocket's in there. I'm going to be using Rust QLite or however you want to call that, and I'm going to be using Saturday and things like that, but I'll get to that later. First thing I know is that you seem to need to use this macro use. I'm going to call it a directive. Then extern create Rocket. What I believe that macro use does is it allows using these decorator macros, you may call them. That's how the endpoints are made. So here's where the program gets started up. I wrote that out essentially from memory. I don't entirely understand some of what's going on here. It seems, well, I know that this is the entry point for the script here. Launch rocket is just a name I'm arbitrarily giving it, and then the return type is, I guess that means it's inferring it. The compiler's inferring it. I'm not quite sure why there's an error message on this. It could be that I haven't implemented the rocket build part yet. So rocket.build, and then you mount something. I'm trying to do this from memory. It's something like that. And then route. I think you have to do it with a macro exclamation mark like that. And then I could do index, just to give an example. So that's the first route being added. Now, this should be enough to make it capture anything that comes to port 8000 at the /, and then if I just do the /, it'll go its index. So to make it so that happens, I'll set up another. This is like a decorator. I'm going to call it a decorator macro just because I don't know if there's a better word for it. So you do like this. So this will set up a GET request where the root of the I'll call it a web application or web address or whatever is accessed, and then what will happen is you define a function that will do something. This this thing here highlighted becomes like a decorator that at compile time will change the function so that it does that stuff. There's a lot of, well, you'll see what I mean. So if I wanted to, I could make it so that index returns a reference to, if I'm doing this correctly, static string slice, it should be called. And then if I were to do this, hello, welcome to the website, something simple like that. Now what should happen is if I were to run cargo run, has to build it first, and then it should show this should be enough to make the server start running on port 8000. Except it doesn't. I'm still having that issue with this thing. It's because I put a semicolon on it. It was saying in the error down here that it expected a rocket of type build, and then it found a like an empty tuple. And the reason why that happened is because I screwed up I think it's called an implicit return statement. By putting a semicolon on there, it no longer was returning the rocket build that I meant for it to, and it was returning nothing, so I saved that. I seem to still have a mismatched type issue here, and that I don't quite understand. No, it seems to have gone away. So now I should be able to run this. Something is still wrong with it. Rocket failed to bind network socket to give an address port. That might be because I've already got one running elsewhere. And it is. I don't immediately know how to tell it to use a different port, so I'm going to just close the other one. There it is. So now it's running on port 8000. So if I were to do a curl or CURL here, I could do localhost 8000, and we've got that hello, welcome to the website. So that's hitting the index, and that's showing that there. If I wanted to make another route, there's something I want to do first. So I'm going to cargo add SQLite. This will enable using, I'm going to call it SQLite for lack of knowing if there's a better way to say it. And that enables making a database that you don't need to have a server running to give it. It's just like a file system based database. So what that will do is allow me to just write SQL queries and statements and all that to a file. Now, for some reason, I'll do this one way first, and then I'll show the mistake, and then I'll fix it. So I'm going to make an inner scope here, and I'm going to make a database. I'm going to create it and create a table in it and all these kinds of things. And then when the scope exits, it'll be dropped out of it. It won't hold the connection anymore because I'm going to make it so that it connects to it every time I want to access it instead of leaving an open connection. And again, I'm doing this all from memory. So the open method returns a result. I'm going to just make it expect that it worked, and if it doesn't, it'll say failed to. I'll just say I'll connect to database. Program terminating. So this expect is going to make it so that if the database, what it'll do is if there is no data.SQLite file, it will create one, and if there is one, it will open a connection to it as a database. And if it can't, the result says error for any reason, it will write to the console, failed to open connection to database, failed to connect to database, and the program will terminate. So if one thing I will do now is I'll close this server, and I'm going to, the cargo watch thing I did earlier, I'm going to run that now. So every time I save any changes to the script here, or whatever the code text here, it will now watch for that and rerun cargo watch -x run. I hope you like watching things compile. That's what's happening. Wow, something went terribly wrong, and that's what I left in on purpose. So in cargo.toml, I'll call it, something has to be added to this dependency here. So curly, I'm going to call them curly braces, version equals 0 and all that. Then I have to enable some features. I think it's bundled, and when I save that, cargo is watching that. I changed it, is recompiling it. Now this time it should run, and you should also see the data.SQLite file get created in over here, and there it is. And if I do any git commits, it should also not include that. And it looks like because it's in that git ignore, it's gray like that instead of a green file. So that seems all right. So now I have something that's creating the database. I should be able to make a table in there. So let immutable statement equals db match db connection. I think it's .prepare. I'm kind of wondering why I'm not seeing it auto suggesting what I'm, anyway. Actually, I can just execute this. I don't have to prepare this. There. Create. I believe it's, I'm going to have my case, I usually do all my SQL statements in just lowercase, so I'm trying to look professional at the moment, but I'm going to, because of that, not remember which ones need to be uppercase. I also haven't done this in a while from memory, so I might mess up a bit of this. Something definitely is not good with that. Oh, it's doing all that because I haven't actually finished the match statement. So if this comes back with an OK, it'll give a statement. I'm not entirely sure I need to do that with it, but wait, what's it returning actually? It's returning a result, so I'm getting rid of that whole statement thing. This is just a result here. It returns a U size. Well, let me at least read what it actually says. Returns the number of rows that were changed or inserted. Oh, all right. In the case of an error, I'm just throwing away whatever it hands me, and I'm just printing that there was a failure. Table created. If there were something like a syntax error in my SQL statement here, this error that I'm throwing away, I could change that to say details, and then I could add details in the print line statement to actually show me what the error message is if I have like a syntax problem or something like that. But I'm going to just throw that away for now. I've got something wrong with it. Oh, I think there's some parameters that need to be included here. A second argument for empty tuple for no parameters. Okay, so now my thing's compiling and running, and it says table created result size 0, so that indicates that the table was created properly. So the readability of this is a bit awful, but oh, there we go. I used the auto formatting thing, and it did this for me. So it creates a connection to the data.sqlite file. It expects it to unwrap properly, and if not, it terminates the program saying something. There's a result that seems to be unused, but I almost could just... I don't need to assign that. I can just do a match statement there. So match db connection.execute. Create table if none exists to-do list. ID integer is primary key. Item varchar is not null. Second argument is no parameters. And then if that returns an OK, it makes a statement saying that it was OK. And if it's not OK, it shows that it failed to create the table. After that happens, it just drops the entire connection out of by ending the scope. Then it sets up its build, its mount, and its index and everything like that. So now there are going to be 3 endpoints made here. One to fetch a list of to-do items, one to add a to-do item to the list, and one to delete a given item from the list. But first I need to make those structs in order for that to be a thing. So I'm going to just make those real quick. And they need to be serializable in order, I followed along with the tutorial and they were made serializable, but I don't particularly remember what the big reason for doing that was, except that I know that I'm going to be writing the to-do items into a JSON object, and I think that has to do with why. So there'll be struct to-do list, which has items, which will be a vector of to-do item. Struct to-do item, which will have an ID, which will be an I64. And I'm going to call it item, which is a string. One more struct, which is a status message, which will be used to determine, to feed back to the user if their row that they wanted to delete gets deleted or not, and that kind of thing. It'll have a message field, and it will be a string. So right now it's just sitting there like that. I'm going to need to add, what do you call it, a directive of some sort, but we'll get to that in a moment. Now I'm going to start by adding another route to the site, to the server, whatever you call it. And this one is to fetch all the to-do items. So this is going to show every row that's in the database, essentially. So it's going to be a GET request at the root of the page, the application, the root of the application, I can call it, with to-do as the, I forget the exact word for these things, but that's the endpoint anyway. Function fetch all to-do items. I'm pretty sure this doesn't need any input parameters, and it's going to return a result where in the good outcome it's going to do a JSON to-do list, and in the result of an error it'll return a string. So the first thing it wants to do is I'm going to type all this out instead of copying and pasting anything. This is for my own practice anyway, that's why I'm doing it like that. So DB connection is match rocket, no, Rusculite, connection, open, so if it's an OK, it will actually return the connection as an object again. If it's an error, this one is going to return, it's going to throw an error, but it's going to be a string type. But it will return it. Okay, so if this goes right, it will, if you can open a connection to data.sqlite, it will assign it to the binding DB connection, and if it gets an error with that, it will stop what it's doing and it will return an error string saying failed to connect the database, and then the error string part of this return value will be satisfied, but we still haven't gotten the JSON to-do list to be made yet, so that's what I'm getting at next. Well, I'm getting toward it, that is. So database connection has been opened up. Now I'm going to do a statement that's like select all from to-do list table or whatever it was called. I think I called it to-do list, yeah. Statement has to be mutable. So in the OK version, we've got a statement, and in the error version, it's going to be similar to as seen before. I'm throwing away what it actually tells me, and I'm going to return an error that says a string from failed to prepare SQL statement query, if you will. So if that works, now there's going to be let results equals statement query map. There's no parameters in this case, so I'm handing that a tuple, or an empty tuple, or whatever you'll call that, and then I need a closure. So it's going to be going over each row, and then I'm doing curly braces. So for each row in the, as you can see, this result is being expected to be a result of type mapped rows, and there's some other stuff I haven't really looked into what that means yet, but essentially query map is going to take the statement and run it over, well, it's going to run it, and then it will get back a bunch of rows, and then it is going to map the closure that I'm making to each of the rows. So what I want to do on each row is wrap it in an OK, where the OK is containing a to-do item. So I'm going to, I don't know if instantiate the struct is the correct terminology for it, but that's what I'll call it for now, where the ID value is going to be row.get 0, so the first element from it. But I'm doing a try operator on here so that if it doesn't find something, if it succeeds, it'll put it in there, and if it fails, it will return an error and basically break out and get make this thing return an error, and it kind of, I'm forgetting the exact way to put it, but it'll make a chain reaction of result errors that goes up this and then gets it out to the main output of this function. So I know that this works, and so I just can't think of the exact perfect way to describe it right now. So anyway, that should be that. I would like for that to disappear. So the item will be row.get the first with another try operator. When I did the auto formatting, it added another comma, a trailing comma on there. So now I've got the results, which is a result of, again, mapped rows. So this thing will have taken the query to select all from the table, and it will have gotten all the rows back, and it'll have taken every single thing from each row, the first column, the second column, and stuck it into the struct of to-do item and returned a bunch of those. So I've essentially got a kind of a collection of OKs holding to-do items at this point. So now, I should be able to just do a match statement on results. So if it came back as an OK, there should be some sense of rows object here that I'm going to collect into something. And if it did not, this may not be exactly the right, most accurate message for the error, but it is good enough for the moment. So if the if the result is holding an OK result, what I'm going to do then is take the contents of that result, which should be some rows, and use the collect statement on it. So let collection, and it has to be of a specific type. I'm not exactly sure why this exists, but it's a SQLite, not that. SQLite result of type vector to-do item, I believe it is. So I'm using what they call a turbo fish here to specify that I want this collection to be I'm going to take that thing that was in the rows, I'm going to use the collect method on it, and then it should be able to be put into a collection that is of type a result holding a vector of to-do items, and remembering that the to-do list holds a vector of to-do items, so we're getting closer to actually getting that list made at this point. So now inside of here, it's a nested match statement, match collection. If it is an OK, what's it called? I'm going to call it output. There's probably another way I could describe it, but I'm going to call it items. That's convenient because I'm going to be able to use that for when I create the struct. Okay, speaking of that, so if the collection ends up being an OK result, the items are now accessible inside of it. I'm going to return them as an OK wrapping around a JSON object that has a to-do list in it, where the to-do list will be a structure that's initialized or instantiated. Where the items that are in the vector of to-do items will be given to it as its vector of to-do items, and all of that will make it so that it comes out as the result of the fetch all to-do items thing. So after that's done, when I run the curl or curl command of localhost, colon 8000/to-do, I'll actually be able to see that empty to-do list, and that will have been what all of this was for. So an OK containing, I believe it's a JSON, and I'm going to need to include something to allow that to work, but I'll write it out first. JSON of a to-do list being initialized or instantiated, where items, it would be like items is items here, so I can do that shorthand for it. So I'm going to get an error here saying that this JSON thing doesn't work. Now I'm going back to cargo.toml, and Rocket version 0.5 and up now does have JSON built into it. So I can do features equals JSON, and then I will need to include it. I got a few of these things in here by accident. So now that I've done that, this should have no problem. So I feel that now it's got that issue that serialize is not satisfied, needs a trait bound in there, which I don't know why it knows that it needs that, but because it's not clear to me where it knew that it wanted that, but I do know what to do to fix that. So these structs need to have that decorator or that derived statement on it. So it needs to be on both of these things, and I know that it seemingly needs to be added to this as well. Now there's a reason why it doesn't like that, because it doesn't have a crate for day, serialize, deserialize. So cargo add day. It recompiled itself, and now I've got that. Everything's running fine, so I should be able to do curl localhost 8000 to do, and it should show me an empty items. There it is. So now I have the ability to fetch it, and all that's left to do now is to make something that can actually generate an item and delete an item So I'm going to do the add to do item route now. This one is going to be of type post. It'll be still the endpoint of to do. This needs to expect a JSON formatted piece of data being sent to it. So what'll happen is that this route won't work if you do a post to do without sending it a JSON object, or if you will. It won't. It'll just see a 404. It won't recognize this as a proper route for it. But if you do send one, it'll match this and send it, or receive it. Data is going to be called item. Add to do item. So now that the data equals item is put here, so the input parameter here is going to be item, which will be of type JSON string. And it will return a status message. It'll return a result with either a status message or a string. I believe that's correct. This is the issue when you're doing something just because you were shown to do it rather than absolutely remembering why you're doing it. But I'm currently following a recipe from memory rather than actually completely thinking through why I'm doing some of these things. But anyway, this will either send a status message saying that something happened, or it will send a string of an error saying that it couldn't get to its endpoint, the completion of what it's trying to do because of an error along the way, which is like what was seen above. So to not drag this out so much, I'm going to take the parts that are absolutely copyable and copy them. So the database connection will be the same. And I will copy the statement preparation, even though I'm going to modify it a little bit. So it's just like usual. It's opening a connection to the database. It's returning an error message if it doesn't have the ability to. It's making a statement, but in this case, instead of selecting everything, it's going to do insert into to-do list. Values. And it's implied. I'm going to do it like this. By giving it null for the ID, it'll auto-increment its own, even though I didn't specify auto-increment in the disable creation. That seems to know how to set that up in this. And then this is going to use a prepared statement, so I'm just putting a placeholder in there for now, $1. And in a further moment, I'm going to do something that will match that with the actual thing I'm looking for. That result equals statement execute, and now I'm going to be giving it some parameters. So I'm going to send it a vector slice, which is an ampersand and then a set of square brackets, and then inside of it a reference to item. So that's where the item that's being given to it is going to be put here in the statement that execute, and then the item that was there will be placed into where the $1 is. So the SQL statement will actually say insert into to-do list, ID item values is null, and then whatever the item was that was typed in the post request. So now it has a problem with that. I wasn't expecting this to happen, so I'm not quite sure what's up with that. I'm just trying things and seeing what happens. if I don't think really quickly what to do with this, I might have to go quickly look up what I did before. I'm trying to do all this from memory without looking it up, and I've thought that this is what I did last time. But this certainly is not what I did. So I can either ask GitHub Copilot to explain this, or I can go quickly look at what's going on. What I want to do is ask Copilot to explain it, just because it would be a little bit more of a learning process for me than to just go immediately jump to looking at the answer. So in line 94, can you explain why there is an error when I try to put the item into the execute parameters? That's what it is. Okay, so it's not item that I want, but it's item.0 that I want. I didn't quite get rid of my issue yet. That's because the square brackets are messed up. There we go. So this JSON item has apparently, numbered fields, or if you will, or numbered properties in it, and so I want the 0th one, or the first one that's in it. So that's what's wrong with that, and now that's corrected. So result will be either a result with the size of how many rows were changed, or an error message, and so I'm going to match that and get that out there too. So the actual insertion of the lines will have happened when I run this execute, and this match thing is just afterward checking what happened and reporting it to the command line. Number of rows that were affected, so I'm pretty sure print line is what I want to use here. But I feel like there's some point here where instead of using print lines, I want to use format statements. And this is probably where that is. I can probably get away with the print line because it'll show it in the console. No, I don't want that. I want a status message here. I feel like I need to do an OK here that contains a status message, that contains a message, that is a format, there we go. So if this goes right and the result has a usize in it and it's an OK, it will get the number of rows and it will wrap an OK around the status message that has the formatted string that says how many lines were in num rows were lines that got inserted. And same thing, if there's an error, I'll throw away what it actually talks about and just write a generic response. I don't need to have a return statement on here because it's the final statement, but I believe I could, and it wouldn't be a problem. But because this is the final statement, it also can be like that. So now what will happen is if I make a statement, a post request to, it looks like it's not compiling something. Oh, it has an issue with something. What is that? This is new. I haven't seen this one before. It has an issue with the fact that my status message is not implementing a certain trait that it wants to. I haven't run into this one yet. Before I go looking at my old version, I'm going to ask Copilot about it. Copilot's explaining that I'm supposed to implement all this stuff for status message, and I really don't, I know I don't need to do that, so I'm going to go check out my older one and see if that gives me any insight into what, I see what's wrong. I forgot to wrap, it needs to be a JSON wrapped around it. That's an example of me, again, I wasn't perfectly thinking about what the return values need to be, but it's returning JSON back as a result that the web browser would render. So it needed that. And that means that this needs to be wrapped around a JSON creating. There we go. That's back up and running. So I'm going to use the curl local host 8000 to do dash capital X post dash D is it needs to have a set of regular quotes around it to show that this is the thing to have as the data for the item, and then it needs to have those escaped quotes for some reason as well to indicate that it's a JSON string and not a JSON object, and so on. I worked out that that seems to be the case of what's going on with that. And it needs to be capital dash capital H and then needs to be called application slash JSON type, or else it will be rejected. If I do this, looks like something's wrong with it. Connection was reset. Okay, so one line was inserted. I'm not entirely sure why that connection was reset thing happens, but just doing the regular to-do get request apparently fixed it, and I was able to get that in. So now it says message one line inserted. So if I do the get request to just see what's in the to-do list, now it'll show up as item ID 1, then the item is this to-do item. So there's that. This other to-do item, oh wow. So we've got, it's not easy to read, but there they are. It's returning a JSON object where it has an items field, which itself contains a vector of to-do items, and then there's all that. So there's one more endpoint to make on this, which is the ability to delete something. So this is a delete request where it has a parameter of ID. So you do an endpoint like localhost colon 8000 slash to do slash 1, and it will delete item 1 from the list and so on. ID will be an input parameter. It will be type I64. This will also return a result of JSON status message or a string. Similarly, 2b4. This one is so similar that I'm going to duplicate the entire thing just to speed up the process. So it's going to make a connection. In fact, I could use, I'm repeating my code a lot at this point, so I could have used some functions or something for that, but in any case, now the statement is going to be, that's interesting, I didn't put semicolons on the end of my SQL statements, but apparently they didn't need them. I thought they would want that. I'm going to do it anyway. delete from to-do list where ID is equal to placeholder. And if the statement's okay, the statement's okay. Let the result be the statement being executed, where in this case, the parameter that's going to be bound to the one thing is going to be ID. That should actually be all that's needed, I think. So so again, right now there's these two items, item 1, item 2. So if I were to do curl localhost 8000 slash to do slash 1, and then I believe it's dash capital X and then delete. It says one line deleted, and if I go back to look at this, I'll see that I have only item 1 is gone, and now I just start with item 2, and there's this other to do item. So now if I add another item using a post, it had an issue with that. I'm going to try doing it again. Okay, so I just do it again and it works. I'm not sure why the post gets that connection was reset problem, but repeating it did make it succeed. Now, it incremented another item, but instead of putting the number 1 back in there, that was already consumed, and so item 2, item 3. We've got item 3 now. So one thing I've never done yet is trying to delete something that already has been deleted, so it just says 0 lines deleted. That's quite interesting. So in this case, it matched the delete request to do slash ID, and the outcome was a 200 OK response succeeded. But in this case, I guess the statement succeeded properly. Interestingly, it says like successfully 0 lines were deleted rather than saying something like failed to find the ID you want or something like that. So that I wasn't expecting that, but I'm glad it does it that way. Okay, so that's it then. This is the essence of what was shown in the tutorial about how to get a Rocket server going. So now I've got a server that is being watched with Cargo's watch feature. Any changes I make to the code causes it to compile and keep running itself. I can add a to-do item, I can delete a to-do item, and I can fetch and show what the to-do items are. So that's as far as it goes. But all this is being done through the command line. What I would like to do is make it so that I can, load up a browser and go to localhost 8000 and then see something like a input field and an add button where I can type in something into the input field and press the add button, and then it shows that it added my to-do item to the list, and then it shows maybe an unordered list of all the items, and then next to each item, besides it's a label of what it's about, would be a button that when you click it, that says delete or remove, it removes it from the list, and so it's got all these same endpoints being used, but through an actual front end rather than this sort of like command line interface. And so I would have continued to go ahead and do that, but I don't want to do that right now because I need to kind of like stop for a bit. But the exercise that I wanted to perform, which was doing this whole thing from memory, did occur, and I'm glad about that. So this is helping me see personally, like I wasn't exactly trying to teach anybody anything here, but it was for me to see how to build each component of a thing that uses a database, build the structures for the data that pieces I want to use, and then building the endpoints and how they work and everything like that, and seeing the repeatability of opening a database connection, preparing a statement, executing it, getting the results, showing whether it succeeded or failed, all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to stop this video at this point, and then there is a chance I'll make another video where it shows me making a basic, I will say, vanilla front end for it, but I may either do a video for that or I may hold off and come back and do one when I've got maybe using a JavaScript framework to do that instead of just making one from typing out everything in pure vanilla HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I'm not sure which one I'll do yet, but I think I don't want to overwhelm you with how much amazing content I'm pumping out constantly here, so I need you to have a chance to catch your breath and look forward to the next thing. So I'm going to stop at that. Thank you so much for watching, if you even did, and if you didn't, you're just as good in my books. Okay, have a nice day.